Now on BBC Radio 4, the chief rock critic of the Times, Peter Paphides, continues his look at lost albums. This week he tells the story of Duran Duran's unreleased first album, Dark Circles.
We'd grown up with glam rock, and obviously the punk thing was foremost in our minds. But we knew we wanted to carve out a sound of our own.
One of the difficulties Birmingham's always had is, unlike centres like Manchester and Liverpool, it's never really produced a whole host of credible bands.
We were looking towards the future, Kraftwerk was the most modern band, and, we were ambitious and forward-thinking.
Ambitious, forward-thinking, hungry for stardom. This was the fledgling Duran Duran, a band whose blueprint for world domination even extended to handwritten manifestos which confidently predicted that they would be playing Madison Square Gardens within 5 years of their inception. They did, of course, go on to achieve all of that and more, prompting scenes of hysteria in Britain and America unseen since the Beatles.
Please, please tell me now. Please, please tell me now.
And yet, rewind to 1979, 2 years before debuting in the top 20 with Planet Earth, and creative tension over the band's look is threatening to drive a wedge into them before they've even begun. On one side of that wedge, Stephen Duffy, lead singer and songwriter. On the other, guitarist, ideas man, John, or, as he was then known, Nigel Taylor. Ever since Nigel covered Stephen's brand new snakeskin amp in white plastic for their show at Cannon Hill Park Puppet Theatre, Stephen has been wondering if his creative vision can truly be contained within Duran Duran. Finally, following their most successful show to date, Stephen drops the bombshell. He calls keyboard player Nick Rhodes and announces his departure from Duran Duran, taking with him all the songs he's written for the band's first album. Told with the help of Nick Rhodes and Stephen Duffy, this is the story of that album, and a look at what one of the best-loved bands of their generation might have become had it not been for the departure of their lead singer. You said you were shattered, Nick, when you heard that Stephen was leaving.
Yeah, I thought our career was over. That was it. We just started to really get ourselves together, and the show we'd played at Barbarella's was actually pretty successful. We went down as well as I'd seen anyone go down, certainly in a support spot. So I thought it was just all beginning.
If the Industrial Revolution had ended somewhere before the 70s, Birmingham had yet to hear about it. Shadowed by the smoke-belching skyline of the second city, this was no place to wear makeup or be a punk.
It was quite a grim time, the way I remember it. I mean, there was a lot of miners' strikes and power cuts, high unemployment.
It was going to get higher, though.
Yeah.
What I remember is you'd get on a bus and there'd be this strange smell, and it would be the smell of oil coming off people who had just come out of the factories and stuff. It was incredibly grey and hostile, but then punk came along. Suddenly you were in the right place because you wanted to be in this grey and hostile environment surrounded by tower blocks. And so I would wander, taking incredibly bleak pictures of this pre-post-industrial hellhole.
But punk is something that exploded in London and the King's Road thing. I mean, London being such a glamorous place, especially to people in Birmingham, growing up myself in Birmingham, I felt I had a sense of that kind of gulf. Well, how did it translate to life in this industrial second city of England?
Well, I thought that going to Barbarella's and walking down the red corridor with the heartbeat of punk rock behind the doors was perhaps one of the most glamorous things I'd ever done, and it was truly exciting, and everybody was dressed amazingly, and there was fantastic music coming out every week.
Barbarella's really was the most truly inspirational place you could possibly be, being a teenager at that time. It was our temple.
And then you troop off to nearby where the town halls to get the night bus home.
Yeah.
There's like a row of bus stops, wasn't
Well, there was a
there?
number 50 and a number 50E, I seem to remember, and the 50E stopped short of where we needed to go, so it was really boring when that one came at sort of 2 in the morning.
You lived right on the edge of town.
It was some comfort that there was two of us when we both had our sort of makeup and spiked hair and
The number 50
women's
to
clothes.
Hollywood.
You know, it was an interesting ride at times.
Because punk did all of the moaning on about the world, we took our lead to be opposite to that, while still imbued with the punk spirit.
Yeah, definitely. I bet it turned a little nasty, really. I mean, you had the Angelic Upstarts and Sham 69 and the skinhead thing that started happening, and that had become an unattractive part of the movement. And that's, I think, what caused a lot of bands to veer away from it, and you knew it was...
We were the anti-oi.
With the artful nihilism of punk having degenerated into a beery, laddish riot, the young Duran Duran sought to distance themselves from it. There must have been excited conversations, as teenagers do have, about the new band. What should we do? What's our aesthetic? All this sort of stuff.
Well, I think that the amazing thing was that we had more conversations about that than perhaps anything else. I mean, we were...
As you can see by our posters.
I gather John had a manifesto of sorts, is that right?
Yeah, he did. Still has it now. There was a lot of things like Madison Square Garden, 3 trucks. We'll have this sort of lighting. We're going to be playing there.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was more to do with targets to be reached and the sort of lighting that we would have.
Because John was interested in theatre design, wasn't he?
Completely.
That's what he would have done if we'd have gone on. So it's all that Russian...
Just a bunch of old lovies, really.
But it was wrapped up with incredible ambition.
Where were your rehearsals, your first rehearsals?
Well, my parents used to have a toy shop, and so there was a room above that at the Maypole in Birmingham, and we used to rehearse there, but I don't know that those were the first rehearsals, were they?
There was certainly a rehearsal at John's house.
Yeah, maybe. We used to rehearse in bedrooms.
That was pretty much where we got it together, though, wasn't it? Surrounded by lots of toys in boxes.
So can you remember what the first song you wrote together was?
New Haven Dieppe, wasn't it called?
Oh, yes.
Yes, it was called New Haven Dieppe, which was the title of a George Simenon book, the thriller writer.
So you're already aiming high. I mean, you can't imagine, say, Oasis is the first song. Box of documents here. What are they? Posters, flyers?
This is where we were. City of Birmingham Polytechnic Department of Foundation Studies and Experimental Workshop.
Well, it was the experimental workshop that obviously sold it.
What was this experimental workshop?
Well, it's where futurism was reborn.
It's actually rather wonderful, isn't it?
This is a poster for the first concert.
This is really exciting.
PM. It was early stuff.
But it's fantastic that John would actually go out on the day and write 6:30 tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Does he still do that?
Yeah. Only when ticket sales are bad.
This is really exciting because what we're looking at here is the monochrome photocopied poster of a concrete edifice. And
we were almost called Concrete Edifice.
Yes.
So this was Duran Duran's first show?
Yeah.
The very first one?
In the lecture theatre of the Experimental Workshop. But that's the amazing thing. We say that Birmingham was this incredibly bleak and terrible place, but there were still things like that.
Wasn't there something about having to cover all the equipment in white plastic?
I had a beautiful Salma bass amplifier that was snakeskin effect, and it was kind of this old 50s amplifier. The day before the first gig, Niger decided to cover all of the amplifiers in white plastic.
They did look good, though.
Unfortunately, he managed to also glue his fingers together, which sort of negated it made it punkier than we were expecting.
We just walked out of the concourse at Birmingham New Street station. We're on Birmingham New Street, which is a street I used to pace up and down very often as a child, just hunting out of record shops, going from one record shop to another, trying to buy as many records with my pocket money as possible. I'm just looking behind me, I can see the Rotunda, which is obviously a famous Birmingham landmark. When it was built, people said it was an eyesore, that it wouldn't last. It looked thoroughly incongruous, which is kind of in some ways runs parallels with Duran Duran's own career through the decades. They're still here after all these years. Just come to a shop called Swordfish Records. The last time I was here it was in another location, but it's very definitely Swordfish because it's got the same logo it used to have. And this is a shop I spent many fond teenage Saturday afternoons just browsing in. I seem to remember it was run by a couple of guys who were real veterans of the Birmingham music scene. Mike and Gareth run Swordfish Records. Both of them attended Duran Duran's first ever show.
It was mainly friends that turned up. It wasn't really advertised that much, and from what I remember, I don't think there were that many people there.
Did you come away thinking, wow, I've really seen something potentially massive here?
I don't think we thought anything was particularly potentially massive there. It was just very unusual. They were completely different to any of the other local bands at the time. Nick had got his first synthesizer, this little Wasp synthesizer, which had just come on the market, and a drum machine. I think the big thing is Duran Duran were never really part of a local scene. They'd always set themselves aside from that.
Why was that?
I think they just saw themselves separate to what was going on. But they definitely made a conscious decision early on. They didn't want to play pub gigs or anything like that. There was something about them that stuck out from the rest of the Birmingham scene. A lot of people couldn't see it. I think John's idea, I always remember him talking about his basic premise, was to have a band that was a cross between Chic and the Sex Pistols.
Mike from Swordfish.
Steve had got unusual records for someone of that age at the time. He got things like the Incredible String Band and Dylan albums, which a lot of people didn't have at that time. The other band that became a very strong influence on, particularly at that time, was the early Japan. What it looked like and everything, I think you can see that in the early Duran photos and everything.
The look was totally repeated. You had this heavy on makeup and long dyed hair, pink hair, blonde hair, and an opulent but DIY sort of look, wasn't it, at the same time?
Well, it's the early days of the frilly shirt.
Nick Rhodes.
Stephen was obviously way ahead in his literary leanings at that time because most 16, 17, 18-year-old kids had not really read Scott Fitzgerald. They're more likely to have been forced to read Dickens at school. Mm-hmm. But Stephen also had read Jack Kerouac and a lot of interesting things that he brought. He was really interested in poetry, in lyrics, and it's a bit of a lost art form sometimes. We're so used to hearing throwaway junk.
Stephen Duffy.
Because we couldn't write about our experience, because we hadn't got any, we looked elsewhere
for other people's experiences.
Yes. And I just filched it. I just stole it.
Well, we've got The Great Gatsby here, which you've kindly brought in.
Well,
Can you give me an example?
It's very useful, this book, I seem to remember, Steve.
It's very useful.
I think I've got the first line from here. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform. And it is sort of
I found you in uniform, standing to attention, tall, no glimpse of the human heart.
I think we were a little bit poorer for the absence of such wholesale kind of appropriation.
I see it as being sampling.
Precisely, early sampling.
As the decade came to an end, Duran Duran had every reason to feel pleased with themselves. They had a strong repertoire, and their live sound was coming together.
I remember one moment very well. When we were on stage in Barbarella's, we thought we'd arrived. It actually ended up being our last show, the pinnacle of the first Duran Duran. But we were supporting a Birmingham group called Fashion. Mulligan, who was in the band, was somewhat of a cult figure in Birmingham and really had a lot of style.
He had these long braids, didn't he?
Exactly.
He was really stood out.
Yeah, and they definitely had something about them. But anyway, we got on stage, and it was a pretty punky crowd still then. And I turned on the rhythm unit. I think it was on slow rock, which was painfully slow rock is what it should have been called. And Stephen walked up to the microphone. We were all wearing our outfits, our women's clothes. And he said, this is a song that was inspired by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it's called, which one was it? Was it Signals in Smoke? At that point, I thought we were actually going to get bottled off stage. But
But I thought, let's do an instrumental number and I'll just do a bit of a dance. It's what punk rock has been missing.
Duran Duran were some way off securing themselves a deal, but that didn't deter them from finding ways of releasing their own material.
The little cassette tape was made, which they called Dusk Till Dawn, which had a little photocopied cover. I remember there was an instrumental introduction, and then there were about 5 of the songs like Hawks Don't Share, Aztec Moon, Big Store, and then it ended with a little instrumental outro. I seem to remember them making a few copies of this that they were going to send out to try to get gigs in various places, but they were together for such a short time, I don't think any of this ever got done. I seem to remember they coloured in with a little bits of felt pen on it.
I love that idea of a young Nick Rhodes in his makeup and very carefully colouring in little details of photocopied inserts and stuff.
Well, I'm here in the Aztec night, birds flying overhead, flying far.
We never recorded in a studio. We only recorded in a toy shop and at the lecture theatre. There was no film of us, and there's probably about 7 black and white pictures. It's so opposite now that everybody has all of their demos on Facebook and MySpace.
As a result, it heightens the mystique, doesn't it? Because even this poster is a little bit like a microcosm of this time. These shadowy details of a time that's lost to us now.
Shadowy Details is our next album.
I read magazines and books, but never.
Let's talk about a song I'm fascinated by, enduringly so, possibly because I'm from Birmingham as well, is Big Store.
they lead you to Exhibit C,
which is a photograph taken in the Big Store, which is Rackham's department store.
very nice too. Yes.
Tell me a little bit about how that song came about.
Well, we would meet in the cafeteria at Rackham's department store on the 3rd floor, and you'd have to walk through lingerie, perhaps, to get there. And we would
On a good day.
And we would have a pot of tea, and we'd kind of sit there talking about Andy Warhol and how we're never going to support Gong.
Yeah. Rackham's was like the Harrods of Birmingham, wasn't it?
It had a glamour to us at that
It
time.
really did, yeah.
What was the Warhol book called? Was it A to B and Back
From A
Again?
to B and back again, yeah.
And that had a lot about shopping in it. And I think that that's why we were so drawn to this. I suppose also to write, it's a song about consumerism, isn't it? I suppose in a way.
But I love this idea of crowbarring this very Warholian worldview. So essentially displaying yourself at the glamorous department store in Birmingham amongst what would have been, if I remember rightly, gaggles of clucking old ladies sipping their cream teas.
Which is exactly what we've turned into.
For any Birmingham band seeking to become cool in a post-punk age, the city's musical traditions represented something of a handicap. In 1979, you didn't impress anyone by name-dropping the likes of Moody Blues, the Applejacks, or even ELO. Like their heroes Kraftwerk, though, Duran Duran were looking to create a bold, futuristic, new music that effectively erased the past. Casting around for a backdrop, inspiration came from an unlikely source.
One of the difficulties probably that Birmingham's always had is, unlike centres like Manchester and Liverpool, it's never really produced a whole host of credible bands. It's never produced a Joy Division.
Why is that?
I don't know if you can put your finger on it, but a lot of the bands that have come out have lacked a degree of credibility.
It's the Brummie accent. It's never gone down very well.
It's a place that doesn't have that mystery about it.
Probably not. I think it's never been a really well-liked city, has it, Birmingham, from the outside?
I think it has its own sense of humour. It's a self-deprecating humour, so I think a lot of it's tied in with that. But I think it has changed, hasn't it, maybe? Unbeknownst to the young Nick Rhodes, disaster was about to strike. If Stephen Duffy's snowballing confidence as a songwriter was edging Duran Duran closer to a record deal, it was also attracting unwelcome attention from their rivals. Deep in the heart of Birmingham's small but competitive punk community, mutiny was afoot. You must have made the decision that whatever you're going to do, you were going to leave Duran Duran. You had to go and do something else.
I think I was kidnapped.
The Subterranean Hawks stole our singer.
A rival band.
TVI, wasn't it?
Oh, it was TVI, yes, at the time, exactly. You became the Subterranean Hawks, didn't you?
You were poached, essentially.
Yes, I was, young and naive, and we thought everything was moving so quickly. As soon as Gary Newman went on Top of the Pops, I thought, well, that's over. What's the next thing? And obviously I thought the next thing was going to be dressing up as Keith Richards.
Yeah.
That never took off.
Well, several members dressed as Keith Richards in your band at that time, I seem to remember.
Yes.
Particularly David Kusworth.
I believe some of them still are. Here's TVI's ex-guitarist, Dave Kusworth. What happened with Stephen Duffy then? Had you poached him, or did he just left, or what?
He was actually a big fan of TVI, and the drummer, Dave Twist, knew him really well, and Andrew Wickett left TVI, and he said to me, I know a singer and you'll do this. And I think the Durans were really jealous of this, and they actually got very, very angry about taking their singer off them. But they seemed to think that they must then get Andrew Wickett, who's in TVI, to sing with them.
I'm imagining a scenario where you're gazing daggers at people across a crowded room at Barbarella's.
John Taylor and Nick Bates were very middle-class kids from Hollywood and up from Moseley, and it was different. I used to get on with them, but I think one day on the bus I said that I could kill you, stuff like that.
I guess local rivalries, they never held you to it, though.
No, nothing ever happened, really.
Gareth and Mike from Swordfish Records.
It created a competition between the two bands to see who could get a record out first.
And who won?
The Hawks won.
Maybe that fired them up to take it to the next level.
I think from the inception of what was to become what most people know as Duran Duran, they could never have worked on an independent label. They were destined for major labels, and there was no way it was going to be anything else.
As the video to Rio so colourfully proves.
Exactly.
Her name is Rio and she dances on the sand. Oh, Rio, dancer across the Rio Grande.
With former child actor Simon Le Bon as their lead singer, they became the most popular band of their generation. Stephen Duffy.
I was always very happy that I'd left, mainly because they were so incredibly successful, and I knew that they needed a loud frontman. I was always too quietly spoken to have done that.
Following the dissolution of the Hawks, Dave Kusworth continued to plough his own furrow in the Birmingham indie scene. Like everyone else in Britain in the early 80s, he had no choice but to watch Duran mania take hold.
They had a lot of money thrown at them, champagne shoved in their faces when they were very young, and basically told, do you want to be rich or see any of your friends again? And they went for the option. But we're talking about when they were like 18 years old, So how can you blame them, really,
Incredibly, the future that Duran Duran had so meticulously planned finally came true, and yet the album around which they had planned it never made it as far as the recording studio. Far from dwelling upon what might have been, Stephen Duffy set to work on his own career and, in 1985, reached the British top 3 with Kiss Me. After 2 solo albums, though, he retreated from the public glare and made several albums of exquisite folk pop with the Lilac Time. Had he and Nick Rhodes not happened upon each other at a Vivienne Westwood party in 2000, the story of Duran Duran's lost first album would be an unresolved one. The timing, though, couldn't have been better.
I'd recently moved house and found a cassette of the first concert. So, I knew that we had this. Now, obviously, Nick would be interested to hear this. So I brought the cassette over to him, and then we decided to make a record.
And how did these songs strike you with that time having elapsed?
Well, they obviously had a naivety about them that was attractive. One of the things that when you start writing songs when you're that age that you do have on your side is that you haven't failed, and it's very natural and raw, and it had that appeal to
it. We went into a room at Air, the boardroom, and we got all of these old synthesizers and drum machines. So in a way we were relearning everything, and it was new again because we'd completely forgotten how all of this worked. So there was lots of wild noises going on.
Finally, in 2002, Stephen Duffy and Nick Rhodes finished what they had begun 22 years previously. Calling themselves the Devils to avoid confusion, they released Dark Circles to universally positive reviews. Confirmation, surely, that that first lineup really did have something going for it, even if the clothes did leave a little to be desired. And the satin jodhpurs, what gigs did you wear those on?
The first concert, satin jodhpurs, quite why I thought I had to shave my legs.
You shaved your, what, to the bit that it would show?
No, all of them. I just thought acoustically shaved legs were probably better. I think it was on the manifesto, wasn't it?
I probably was, along with the fur-covered teacup and...
fur-covered teacup.
Stephen, I'm going to cover the amplifiers in white plastic. You go off and shave your legs. It was that kind of a band.
Still is, unsurprisingly, I'm afraid. Don't know what you're missing.
Lost Albums was presented by The Times chief rock critic Peter Paphides.